The open road has always been a graveyard of ambition. For over a century, the automobile industry has been shaped by visionaries who turned metal, rubber, and imagination into rolling symbols of freedom, status, and engineering excellence. Yet, for every brand that still dominates global highways, there are names that once echoed in driveways, racing circuits, and pop culture, only to vanish into automotive history. These were not failures of engineering alone. They were failures of strategy, identity, leadership, and timing. The automotive world does not forgive arrogance, complacency, or misalignment with the market. In this script, we will examine the biggest mistakes that killed legendary car brands. We will look past the nostalgia and dissect the decisions that turned icons into cautionary tales. Because the truth about why these empires fell is not always about bad cars. It is about bad choices. Plymouth, the death of identity. Plymouth was once the heartbeat of American affordability and performance. Born in 1928 as Chrysler's value brand, it quickly earned respect for durability, smart engineering, and a lineup that appealed to everyday buyers. By the 1960s and 1970s, Plymouth was synonymous with muscle and innovation. The Barracuda, Roadrunner GTX, and Duster were not just cars, they were cultural touchstones. They represented raw power, accessible performance, and a distinctly American spirit. But success breeds complacency, and Plymouth's downfall began when Chrysler made a fatal strategic error. They stopped treating Plymouth as its own entity and started treating it as a budget mirror. The biggest mistake was platform oversharing without preserving brand character. In the 1980s and 1990s, Chrysler's corporate strategy leaned heavily on badge engineering. Plymouth models became rebadged Dodges or Chryslers with minor trim differences and lower price tags. The Valiant, Volare, and later the Neon and Breeze carried the Plymouth name, but lacked a unique engineering philosophy or emotional appeal. While Dodge positioned itself as performance-oriented and Chrysler as upscale, Plymouth was left in a marketing no man's land. It was neither the sporty choice nor the luxury choice. It was simply the cheaper option, and in the automotive world, cheap does not build loyalty. Cheap builds indifference. Compounding this identity crisis was a complete failure to anticipate the market's shift toward crossovers, SUVs, and minivans. Chrysler itself capitalized brilliantly on the minivan revolution, but Plymouth was treated as an afterthought. The Voyager and Grand Voyager were essentially twins of Dodge's Caravan, but without the performance upgrades or marketing push that made Dodge's versions desirable. Plymouth's sedan-heavy lineup aged poorly in quality, reliability, and design. Consumer Reports and J.D. Power rankings told a grim story. Dealerships lost faith. Enthusiasts moved on. By the late 1990s, Plymouth's sales had collapsed, and the brand was bleeding money. When Daimler merged with Chrysler in 1998, corporate executives ran the numbers and realized Plymouth was redundant. In 2001, the brand was quietly retired. Plymouth did not die because people stopped needing affordable cars. It died because Chrysler forgot to give Plymouth a reason to exist beyond a price tag. When a brand loses its soul, it does not fade overnight. It starves slowly. Say B. When corporate synergy suffocates innovation. If Plymouth's tragedy was identity erosion, Saab's was a masterclass in how corporate integration can strangle innovation. Founded in 1945 by an aircraft manufacturer, Saab brought an entirely different philosophy to car making. Safety, ergonomics, turbocharging, and unconventional design were not marketing slogans. They were engineering mandates. The Saab 99, 900, and 9000 were beloved by engineers, journalists, and loyalists who appreciated their thoughtful, driver-centric approach. Saab did not chase trends. They set them. They pioneered turbocharged engines for mainstream buyers, introduced heated seats decades before they became standard, and built cars that felt like cockpits rather than appliances. For decades, Saab thrived on its independence and intellectual curiosity. Then came General Motors. In 1990, GM acquired a 50% stake in Saab, eventually taking full control by 2000. On paper, it was a perfect marriage. Saab needed capital and global distribution. GM needed European engineering credibility and niche market expertise. In practice, it became a slow-motion suffocation. The biggest mistake was not the acquisition itself, but how GM managed it. Instead of allowing Saab to evolve organically, GM forced it onto shared platforms, standardized supply chains, and cost reduction templates. The Saab 9-3 and 9-5 were mechanically tied to the Opel Vectra and Chevrolet Malibu. While this reduced development costs, it erased the brand's engineering distinctiveness. The steering became numb, the chassis tuning grew generic, and the once revolutionary ergonomics were diluted to meet GM's global manufacturing standards. Worse, Saab was starved of timely updates. The 9-5 platform ran for over a decade with minor facelifts, while competitors refreshed their lineups every 5 to 6 years. Saab's marketing grew confused, oscillating between performance heritage and family car practicality. Meanwhile, GM's internal bureaucracy delayed crucial investments in new powertrains, infotainment systems, and emissions compliance. By the 2008 financial crisis, GM was collapsing under its own weight, and Saab was deemed expendable. GM sold the brand to Spyker Cars in 2010, a small Dutch manufacturer with grand ambitions but insufficient capital. Spyker's mismanagement, delayed supplier payments, and inability to secure Chinese investment sealed Saab's fate. In December 2011, Saab Automobile filed for bankruptcy. The tragedy of Saab is not that it failed to innovate. It is that it was not allowed to. When a company that thrives on independence is forced into a template-driven corporate structure, the result is not synergy, it is stagnation. Saab did not lose to better cars. It lost to better spreadsheets. Pontiac, the excitement that lost its engine. Pontiac was born in 1926 as General Motors' performance-focused division, positioned between Chevrolet and Oldsmobile. Its early reputation was built on reliability, but its golden era arrived in the 1960s with the birth of the modern muscle car. The GTO, Firebird, Trans Am, and later the G8 were not just vehicles, they were declarations of American horsepower and attitude. Pontiac's marketing leaned heavily into youth, rebellion, and performance. Their slogan, "We build excitement," was not corporate jargon, it was a promise. And for decades, Pontiac delivered. The fatal mistake began in the 1980s and 1990s, when GM's brand portfolio strategy shifted from differentiation to cost efficiency. Instead of giving Pontiac unique platforms, GM executives began treating it as a style variant of Chevrolet. The Grand Am, Sunfire, Grand Prix, and Bonneville shared chassis, engines, and interiors with their Chevrolet counterparts. The differences were largely cosmetic: slightly sportier suspensions, different grilles, and marketing campaigns that emphasized excitement without backing it up with engineering. Enthusiasts noticed first. The Fiero's handling flaws, the Aztek's polarizing design, and the consistent mediocrity of V6-powered sedans eroded trust. Pontiac was no longer the performance alternative. It was the sporty-looking alternative. Compounding this was GM's internal competition strategy. Rather than positioning Pontiac against external rivals like Ford or Toyota, GM allowed Pontiac to cannibalize Chevrolet and Buick sales. When a customer walked into a dealership, the Pontiac salesperson and the Chevrolet salesperson were often selling the same mechanical package at slightly different price points. This brand dilution confused buyers, frustrated dealers, and destroyed loyalty. By the mid-2000s, Pontiac's sales were propped up by fleet sales and rental contracts, not consumer demand. The brand had become a placeholder in GM's lineup rather than a destination. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, GM was forced to restructure or die. The company ran a brutal brand rationalization exercise. Pontiac, already bleeding money and lacking a clear market position, was the easiest to cut. In 2009, GM announced Pontiac's phase-out. The final G8 rolled off the line, and a legacy of American performance faded into corporate archives. Pontiac's mistake was not that it lost its way overnight. It was that GM allowed a brand built on emotion and engineering to become a marketing exercise in badge variation. When excitement is manufactured rather than engineered, it does not resonate, it evaporates. DeLorean. Vision without execution. Few car brands are as instantly recognizable as DeLorean. The stainless steel body, gull-wing doors, and rear-mounted V6 engine made the DMC-12 a design icon. Its appearance in Back to the Future immortalized it in global pop culture. Yet, behind the cinematic glamour lies a story of ambition, mismanagement, and fatal strategic errors. John DeLorean was a brilliant engineer and charismatic executive who had risen through GM's ranks before striking out on his own. He wanted to build a sports car that was safe, reliable, and revolutionary. What he built instead was a cautionary tale about the gap between vision and operational discipline. The biggest mistake was overpromising and under-delivering on production quality and financial planning. DeLorean Motor Company was founded in 1975 with high expectations, but the company was chronically undercapitalized from the start. Instead of securing stable, long-term funding, DeLorean relied on government subsidies from Northern Ireland, which tied the factory to a location with limited automotive infrastructure and a workforce inexperienced in car manufacturing. The Belfast plant opened in 1981, but quality control was catastrophic. Panel gaps were uneven, stainless steel bodies corroded in coastal climates, electrical systems failed, and the PRV V6 engine was underpowered for a car that promised sports car performance. The DMC-12 arrived 2 years late, $3,000 over budget, and thousands of dollars above its projected price. Compounding these operational failures was DeLorean's inability to manage public perception and legal vulnerability. When the company ran out of money, John DeLorean turned to controversial investors and became entangled in an FBI sting operation involving alleged drug trafficking to secure emergency funding. Though he was acquitted in court, the scandal destroyed consumer confidence and terrified dealerships. Orders were cancelled. Financing dried up. The brand's reputation shifted from innovative to fraudulent. By late 1982, just over a year after production began, DeLorean Motor Company filed for bankruptcy. Fewer than 9,000 cars were ever built. The lesson of DeLorean is not that visionary ideas fail. It is that vision, without financial discipline, quality control, and ethical leadership, is a house built on glass. A car company does not survive on press coverage or movie cameos. It survives on reliability, delivery timelines, supplier relationships, and trust. DeLorean had the first two in abundance, but lacked the rest. The brand did not die because people stopped wanting something different. It died because it could not deliver what it promised, and when promises break, loyalty does not wait for a second chance. Rover, the weight of historical mismanagement. Rover's story is one of the longest and most tragic in automotive history. Once a symbol of British engineering excellence, Rover produced iconic vehicles like the P4, P5,